not
Hi,
work.
I'm Mike London. I'm visiting with artists and arts leaders who work right here in the Miami Valley. Culture Work supports a wide range of artists and arts organizations, and these interviews are our opportunity to get to know a few of them and their art, and have them tell us about who they are. And so today, I'm talking with Neal Gittleman. Hey, Neal.
How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing okay. All I'm going to say is that you are the conductor of the Dayton Philharmonic, but can you share with us about yourself? Where did it start? I know you haven't been in, although you're a Daytonian, we think of you that way. You've been here so long, but where did your arts career start?
Well, I got interested in music, or was introduced to music as a kid. My mother was a public school music teacher. My father played the record player and the radio. And they were the people who introduced me to music of all kinds. My first exposure to classical music, again, came when I was a kid, when my parents plunked me down in front of the little black and white television and had me watch Leonard Bernstein's Young People's Concerts with the New York Philharmonic. There was a time in this country when there were concerts for kids on television by a major symphony orchestra. It's been many, many years since that has happened, but I was one of a whole generation of people who were introduced to this by the charisma of Leonard Bernstein. And somewhere along the way, I mean, I wasn't one of those people who immediately said, oh, I want to be like Lenny, I want to conduct. That came much later in my life. But that was where I first got a sense of the excitement of classical music, and especially the excitement of orchestral music. And just the thrill of it, and how it dealt with all these really interesting topics of emotion and just life. And it was a way that people expressed their feelings. And that's how I got into it.
Those were amazing concerts. I
They
haven't
really
thought
were.
about that for a long time. Yeah, those were amazing. I remember those.
And the cool thing is, for a while you could buy them on DVD. You probably still can buy them on DVD.
Yeah.
But now I think virtually all of them, you can see them on YouTube. And they're really pretty amazing. And the beautiful thing I think about them is that Lenny was, I went to Yale. So when I say Leonard Bernstein, who went to Harvard, is smart, that's, I'm admitting something there. But Lenny was really smart because everything he said, he aimed slightly over the head of the kids. He would say things like, now I know you all know what counterpoint is. And of course most of the kids had no idea what counterpoint was, but they knew it was something complicated, and he knew that he thought they knew it. And so he had them in the palm of his hand right away. And he sort of, he expected that kids would just follow along. And yeah, there'd be things they wouldn't understand, but they'd get the overall gist. And most importantly, they'd get the excitement and the enthusiasm. And yeah, that's what did it for me.
So what was your first instrument?
I started on piano. My mother was my first piano teacher. And at a certain point, we came to the conclusion that either she was going to have to stop being my piano teacher, or she was going to have to stop being my mother, because she was not a great teacher for me, and I was a horrible student for her. And when that happened, that's when I switched to violin. And so violin was the thing. I played violin, and then I played in my school orchestra, and that's how I got more involved in the idea of an orchestra. Because it's one thing to sit in an audience and hear an orchestra. It's another thing to play in one. Even if it's kind of a sounding school orchestra, there's something about the excitement of being with those other people and making music with them that's really intoxicating. And I think that's why I ended up doing what I'm doing. When I was in college, I was playing really good orchestra, probably easily the best orchestra I'd ever played in my life. And at that point, I really fell in love with an orchestra, because, it's one thing what your elementary school or junior high or high school orchestra, or even a really good youth orchestra. But when you're playing in what feels like almost a professional kind of a thing, it really is intoxicating. And so at the same time that I was really falling in love with the orchestra as a way of making music, I was also falling out of love with my own violin playing, which I was hearing, 2 inches away in my own ear. And the guy who was conducting the orchestra, conductor who's still a great conductor and guest conducted the Dayton Philharmonic a couple of years ago, a wonderful conductor named John Maucheri. So I would look up at John standing on the podium, and he was having the time of his life. And I thought, I don't really love this, but that looks really fun. And I talked to him and I said, so, if someone wanted to do what you're doing, what would they do? And he sort of gave me a little bit of a push, and, many, many, many years, here I am with the Dayton Philharmonic and making music with great musicians in a fabulous concert hall in Dayton, Ohio.
So
except for the fact that we're not doing anything because of damn COVID-19, but hopefully at some point.
Yes, we're recording this now during this pandemic, but we know it's the time will come when we will come back together.
But the thing that's really crushing about it for us is that we who work in the orchestra world, we do it together. Okay, I can sit down at the piano and I can bang through pieces of music and I get a certain amount of joy out of that. But it's not like being with the orchestra. The musicians, they miss each other. They miss sitting, being together and making incredibly beautiful music happen together and in this collaborative way. And, we cannot do that. So all of us are walking around feeling like, like part of us has been cut off for a while. We'll sew it back on as soon as we can.
Well, for those of us who haven't been in that situation, what does it feel like? What can you just say a little bit more about that unique difference between playing a musical instrument by yourself or with just one or two others, and what it means to play with all of those incredible musicians, to make sound, to make music, to make magic?
I think, this just popped into my head. I mean, I'm not a runner, but, I've jogged a little bit. So imagine that you're running by yourself. That's going to be nice. Maybe not today when it's 90 degrees outside. or you're running with a couple of friends, and that's nice. But imagine you're running like in the New York City Marathon with 100,000 people going up over the span of the Verrazano Bridge at the beginning of the race. I mean, that has got to be just an incredible thrill to be part of that energy of all of those people. And that's a little bit what it's like being an orchestra. It's not quite as packed in, but it's a lot of people. And I think one thing that maybe people in the audience don't realize because they're a little bit kind of slightly at a distance from it, but music is not something imaginary. The sound that musicians make with their instruments is an actual physical force. It's moving the air. There are waves going through the air, and there's a kind of, it's almost like a wave or like a wind that's coming at you. It's not like, there's, those ads for Memorex where the guy's sitting in the chair and the sound is blowing his hair back. But there's an actual physical force of the music. So on stage, we are kind of in the bubble of that force. And I've got it coming right at my face. And it's incredibly exciting. And what the musicians in an orchestra do, it's very difficult. Every single person on stage is an artist in their own right and has music in front of them, which is difficult to do, and it has technical challenges, and there's all this stuff that they have to do to play their own part. And they have to do it in conjunction with all these other people, each of whom are doing their own little thing. What a trumpet player does to make their sound is different from what a flute player is, different from what a percussionist is, different from what a cello player does, and the cello is different from the violin. And so everybody is sort of going through their own complicated individual process to make their sound. But they're also thinking and listening to, they're thinking about and they're listening to the sound that everyone else is making and playing off of that, which is why, when we do something like the Hang On Sloopy video we made back in April at the very beginning of this COVID mess, well, that's kind of fun when you put everybody together and you can sort of create this virtual orchestra. But for each of the musicians, they were just hearing the click of a metronome in their earphones and they were hearing themselves play. There's no feedback from the rest of the people. There's no sense of ensemble. And yeah, it's really cool when you see it all put together, but they're not getting that feeling of being in something bigger than themselves. And that's what we really miss. But then that's the excitement that we offer to the audience. So that's another reason, this COVID thing is hard on everybody because, obviously we can't have the orchestra together, we can't have the audience together. So nobody, even as we put things up on the internet that people can listen to and can see and stream, and we've gotten some stuff coming up in the next few weeks, starting at the end of June, that's really fabulous, that people will be able to see for free. But it's not the same as sitting in the Schuster Center and just being surrounded by that sound. So, we will get back to that at some point. It may not be till we have a vaccine and people feel safe coming back together. And that's one thing that's, CultureWorks and the support that CultureWorks provides to artists and arts institutions in our community is very important, but it's even more important now. Because we're all in this, we just got to get from here to there when we can get back to something like what we used to do before. And the support of CultureWorks is going to be absolutely crucial to keeping the arts alive in this community, a community which to begin with has such a vibrant art scene that, cities 3, 4, 5, 10 times the size of Dayton would kill to have what we have here. So it's incumbent on all of us to protect it and keep it going in these hard times.
Let me ask you this.
Is a great way to do that.
Amen. Let me ask you this. When you're conducting, I don't know if people know beyond what they see. What is a conductor? How do you define conducting an orchestra?
The easiest definition is one. For years and years and years, probably almost 15 years, the Dayton Philharmonic had this wonderful educational program called Spark. And we went into schools, had like 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 different schools across the community. And kids would enter the Spark program in kindergarten and would be in it all the way through their elementary school years, getting to know musicians, getting to see conductors. So one of the things that I would do multiple times a year is go into kindergarten classes to tell them what a conductor is. And these are kids, this is before they'd ever been to a concert. A lot of them didn't know what instruments were. They don't, it's just, and so I had to explain what is a conductor to kids who had no idea. And, I explained that the orchestra was a bunch of people who play musical instruments, and the conductor's job is to help the musicians play the instruments as well as they can. And, honestly, I still think that's the best definition of what a conductor does. That's really what our job is. And anything that we're doing, to the extent that it's doing that it's helping the musicians, is great. And anything that is getting in the way of them playing as well as they can is bad and should be stopped immediately. So it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting job to have because you're constantly asking yourself, what's the one thing that I could do to make this go better? Not what are the 10 things. What's the first thing that I should do now to help the music sound better? And you try to instantaneously do something in the way you're conducting for the orchestra to help that happen. And sometimes it's doing something, giving a big, clear beat at a certain time to help keep things together, or help a musician who's just been counting 47 bars of rest know that this is actually bar 48 and they should play now. And sometimes the best thing the conductor can do is get the hell out of the way and just let the musicians play. So my conducting teacher, he liked to cook. And if you watched him cooking, he loved to cook lamb chops. His lamb chops weren't very good, but it was his big thing. And he would have these lamb chops in a skillet on the stove, and he would cook the way he conducted. He would sort of watch, and then he would poke, he'd poke them a little bit, and then he'd sit back and pay attention, and he'd sort of lean in and maybe, give it a sniff or something like that. But it's like, sometimes you do have to do something. You have to get involved and take an action that's necessary to get the metaphors getting mixed, to get the lamb chops to cook as well as they possibly can. And sometimes there's nothing you can do except sit back and wait and let them do their thing. And that's probably, for a young conductor, that's probably the hardest thing to learn. And my conducting teacher would teach that wonderfully. He would, if a conductor was getting in the way and doing too much, he would yell at the orchestra, would be playing, and he would yell, "Put your hands in your pockets." And so he would want you to just stand there with your hands in your pockets. And you would notice that the orchestra would just keep playing. And in some cases would even play better when you had your hands in your pockets than when you were doing something. And you would also usually learn that when you had your hands in your pockets, you could actually hear better what they were doing than when you were moving around all the time. So it's an interesting job. It's difficult just like the musicians, I said, what they're doing is very complicated. What the conductor does is very complicated also. It's not as complicated as what the musicians are doing, but there's a lot going on that you have to monitor. And you have to constantly be asking yourself, can I do something to make this better? Can I do nothing to make this better? Or there's something really hard coming up in 15 seconds. How am I going to make sure that we're ready to make this thing happen in 15 seconds? So you almost never can sit back and just kind of ride the wave. You always have to be worrying about the next dangerous thing. And every once in a while there'll be a piece of music, you turn the next to last page, and you know that from here to the end, there's really nothing that can possibly go wrong. And then you can just sort of relax, and you have 2 pages when you can enjoy your life and just be there with, surrounded by the music, and you'll know that everything's going to be fine in the end. And that's always a great feeling when that happens.
When you were first conducting, when you really committed into conduct, what was the biggest challenge for you?
The biggest challenge, it was actually what I was just talking about.
Yeah.
The biggest challenge was listening, because you have to be listening to the orchestra, because your job is to fix whatever's wrong, and if you're not listening, you won't know what's wrong. And it's very hard. You get sort of all caught up in yourself and the music that you studied, and the technique, the actual gestures, and everything. And the hardest thing of all is to just listen to what's happening. When I was just starting out, something would happen wrong in the orchestra, and I wouldn't hear it. And you would know because, there was no reaction in my face to a wrong note or something. And my teacher would say, stop. He was Hungarian and he yelled and he had a lisp. So it was always stop instead of stop. He would say, stop. Who played something wrong? And you'd say, I don't know. And then you go back and he'd say, play the same thing again. Play it wrong again to whoever hit. And then they do it again. Stop. Who played something wrong? And you realize how little you're actually aware of what's happening because you're so much in your head and so much about you. And I think that's the biggest thing and the biggest misconception that people have about conductors. People have this idea of the maestro and, the all-powerful Oz who stands up there and makes things happen. When in fact, unless you can relax and step back and truly be aware and listen, you have no control over anything. And so that's a very tricky thing, how to be active, how to be physically active to do the gestures that the musicians are expecting you to do to help keep them together, but still be inside calm enough so that you can, listen and process and know what's happening and hear things that are wrong. And if you hear something that's wrong, 90% of the time with really great musicians, if they make a mistake, they're human. People make a mistake. And, they know they make a mistake. And sometimes you just kind of look at them and you can tell from the expression on their face, like, ooh, I blew that. And if you see that, then you don't have to stop. It's like in baseball, if the batter takes a mighty swing and misses, and the umpire goes, strike! It's like, really? Everybody knows that was a strike. He swung and he missed the ball. Why would you show them up like that? So a lot of the times, the trick is to notice anything that goes wrong, but sort of be calculating. Is that something that needs to be fixed? Or is that just a dumb mistake that won't happen again? Because that's the other thing that conductors learn, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, with a really good orchestra like the Dayton Philharmonic, a professional orchestra. You play a piece, if you go back and you just play it again, 3/4 of anything that was wrong the first time will get fixed just by itself the second time. So it's learning what you really have to work on and learning what will take care of itself. And then if it doesn't take care of itself, then you go back and fix it. But it's that sort of thing where you always have to, that's what I was getting to badly. The conductor has to realize that in a sense, they don't do anything, the conductor. It's the musicians who do everything. And so 90% of what you're doing there is about not just helping, but sort of empowering the musicians to play at their best. And some musicians need attention and prodding. Some musicians need to be left alone. Some musicians need to be, sometimes you have to get them angry in order to break through, have a breakthrough and play really well. Sometimes you need to just sort of be gentle with them, and every person is different. You got 83 people on the stage who you have to try and sort of keep all working together towards the same goal. When, as I said, different people have different buttons, and if you're pushing one person's buttons, you may be annoying the person next to them. So it's the longer I do this, the more it's about the psychology of people working together and keeping a high functioning team high functioning. So I'm fascinated when I see like Greg Popovich or a great basketball coach or Steve Kerr, keeping a really great athletic team playing at a high level, even though the Warriors weren't playing at a high level this year. That's a lot of what a conductor does. Is how do you take a whole bunch of high functioning people and keep them high functioning all at the same time? And it's a really interesting, problem's the wrong word, but it's a really interesting thing to do. And, I love the music, I love conducting, but the longer I do this, it's how you handle the interpersonal relationships between you and the ensemble and within the ensemble. That's where the magic really happens. And that's why this hurt much, because we had, except for we had a Zoom call a week or so ago, and we had almost 40 musicians on it, but they hadn't seen each other since the middle of March, and it's like, even if the person who sits next to you annoys you when they're always blowing their nose during your solo or something, you don't see them for a month, and you realize I've really missed them blowing their nose during my solo or whatever. So we're all looking forward to the moment when we can just be back together and play together, because nobody says I work the oboe or I work the violin. You play the oboe, you play the violin. So there is an element of play in what we do, and I know that when we finally come back together, that's one of the things that will be so important. Not necessarily fixing anything, we'll all be a little bit rusty, but just to be together and to make some beautiful and loud and soft and medium sounds together, it'll be like this big cathartic thing, and we'll probably all be in tears.
Over the years, you have, you and the orchestra, you've just done such a wide range of performed a wide range of music, but you've also had, what you're describing is this incredible collaboration. Right. And you've had a lot of collaboration. I'm just curious, a couple of questions. One's mine and one is actually somebody else's. I'll give you in a second. But when you think about a coming season, a season ahead, and not necessarily in this situation right now, but when you think of, ooh, that's fun. Ooh, that sounds like fun. I really want, what's the kind of thing that just gets you super excited? That's just really fun.
Well, there is one of the problems. It's a little bit like being a kid in a candy store. There is so much music out there.
Yeah.
And there is so much great music out there. And there's, there are old standards. There's Beethoven's Fifth and Beethoven's Ninth and the Brahms symphonies and Tchaikovsky. And there's only so many concerts and, so many things that you can do in any one season. So the hardest thing is figuring out, what can we give up and not do. But every once in a while, something comes along, some piece of music that you've never heard before, and it just sort of captures your imagination. I heard a piece like that last spring by a young U.S. composer named Rena. It's a piece called My Sister's Voice. It's for orchestra and two singers, one of whom is an opera style soprano, a classical singer, and the other is a classical Hindustani singer. So you have someone who sings in the traditional Indian classical music and someone who sings in traditional Western classical music. And you hear these two incredibly beautiful but different voices intertwining with each other with the orchestra. And it just completely blew my mind. And it was like, when I heard that piece, it's like, all right, we're playing that piece in the 2021, 2022 season. one way or another, that's one of the pieces we're going to play, because it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. And, you know, until the moment I heard it, it's like, I never imagined that something could sound like that. And, you know, those are the things that are so exciting, when something just sort of hits you out of left field because somebody thought up something that you never imagined could happen. And, you know, and every piece of music is that way for the most part. You know, some composer somewhere thought of a way of putting the notes together in a way that just kind of is better than a lot of the other ways of putting the notes together. And it's, you know, it says something to you. And, you know, it's like Alice in Wonderland. It says, play me. And until you play it, you're going to feel like, oh, I got to get to that. Yeah, and that's the hardest thing, is having so many great things that you want to do and only so many concerts to do them in, and projects that just sort of get pushed off into the future. And that's another reason why this nest that we're in now is so frustrating. Yeah. You know, because we had pieces we were going to play in the latter part of this season, which got canned. And then we have pieces we're planning on playing next season, and we may be able to play some of them, but we may not be able to play all of them. And, you know, right now I should be thinking about, normally I would be thinking about, what are we going to play starting in September of 2021? Right. But now I'm thinking about, okay, so the pieces that we lost from this spring, which are the ones that we absolutely have to put in that season? And every one of those that goes in that season is going to be pushing something else into the future. Yeah. But I promise you, nothing is going to push My Sister's Voice into the future, because that is a piece. That is a piece which people will just go bananas over. It is incredible.
It sounds exciting. Yeah. Okay, I have a question that I'm supposed to ask you.
Okay.
So as as you know, I've had the opportunity to talk to a wide variety of artists, and so one of the artists that I was speaking to, I said, you know, same question. Tell me what really gets you excited. And what she said was the incredible collaborations, especially I anticipate what Neal is going to come up with. And this was Debbie Blunden Diggs from DC. And so I said, Debbie, do you have a question for Neal? And she goes, yes. So here's Debbie's question. So I hope I get it right. She's, Neal, how do you come up with the collaborative projects that you want to build in this community? What triggers that for you?
It's, you know, it's hard to answer, but I think it's about being inspired by what other people do. One of the things, you know, I would question the whole premise of this interview. I'm not entirely sure I'm an artist. I know the musicians of the orchestra are all artists, and I know I have something to do with making their artistry work. But I really see myself more as a facilitator than an actual performer or an actual artist. But you said you were talking to arts leaders, and okay,
that's right.
I will accept that I'm an arts leader. But the other thing I am is I am a very avid arts audience member. So, you know, I probably miss a few things, but, you know, I go to DC. I go to the Human Race. I go to some of the shows at the Victoria. I go to Bach Society concerts. You know, I go to things. You know, I go to stuff at the Levitt Pavilion. I, you know, sometimes see rock and roll concerts. So because I'm an audience member, you know, I see things that inspire me, and I hear music that inspires me. So for instance, this really cool collaborative show that we the Philharmonic did with DC last spring for their 50th anniversary. One of the middle piece on that program was a dance that Kevin Ward was going to be choreographing. And there was another composer who I had met and sort of just been blown away by their music. Another young American composer named Derek Spiva who lives in Los Angeles. And Kevin was going to do a new piece. I knew that Kevin he kind of likes interesting and challenging pieces of music. And I immediately thought of Derek's music and talked to Derek and explained what we were doing and sort of put together a few recordings of a few of Derek's pieces for Kevin to listen to. And because I had this idea that I was thinking of DC and the energy of the dancers, thinking of dances that I had seen of Kevin's back day when he was the artistic director, when he was in Debbie Blunden Diggs's chair, where she is now, and thinking of the energy and the excitement of Derek's music. And I could I didn't know what it would be, but I could imagine that these were elements that if you put them together would work really well. Now, as it turned out, I was right. But, I didn't know that I was right. So, Debbie imagines, how did he think about it? It's like, it's just, I really like this and I really like this. And I think, what if we put everybody together? Wouldn't that be cool? And so, sometimes that little voice that says, do this is right. And sometimes it's wrong, but in that case, it was certainly right.
When you talk to young musicians today who want to look forward to a career with an orchestra, what's your advice for them?
My advice to them is it's boring. It's just work as hard as you can, because you don't know when the opportunity will come along, and you need to be ready for the opportunity. And it's hard to be in a professional orchestra. The only thing harder than being in a professional orchestra is getting into a professional orchestra, because you have an audition process which is very rigorous, and nobody knows who you are. You're playing behind a screen. So, and it's this weird thing. I mean, you're in a room by yourself, and there's this black curtain in front of you, not right in front of you, but it's in front of the people who are listening. And that there's this committee of people behind the curtain who have in their power to give you a job or not give you a job. And it's got to be just nerve-wracking to do. Much easier, I think, than actually sitting in a chair and doing the job. But you have 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 minutes to prove yourself to these unseen people behind the curtain. And that's why all of the work, that a young musician puts in the practice room, just drilling things and learning to play it's all about when you get to that moment that you can just be in the moment and just play and not be thinking about how odd the whole audition process is, and not be thinking about the people behind the screen, and not be thinking about, the note you played that was just a little bit out of tune. And is that the one thing that's going to make them, you can't think that way. You just have to be in the moment and play the music and be the music, and let the rest of it take care of itself. But that's very hard to do. And I believe that all of that comes from having technique. There's nothing more boring, and it's one reason why I was such a terrible piano student. There's nothing more boring than practicing scales and arpeggios and etudes and these exercises. You want to play fun pieces of music. You don't want to do, but that it's the technical work that gives you the ability to then play and not have to be thinking about how you do what needs to be done. And that applies for conductors as well. There are a variety of gestures that you can use, and each conductor develops their own technique with their hands and their eyes and their ears and their body and the baton that they use to communicate what what they are thinking about the music to the musicians through their silent gestures. And if you don't have a technique that you can rely on, if you don't know they need a clear beat, here's how I'm going to get a clear beat, then you're just kind of at sea. So, I was lucky. I studied for a few years in France, and in classical music, the French are all about technique. It's not so much in their pedagogy. It's not so much about inspiration, but it's a lot about technique, and that helped me because I never got a great piano playing technique. I was pretty decent technique as a violinist, but when it came to conducting, I think I did over the course of several years sort of develop, the ability to do what I had to do to get the result that I thought I needed. And if I didn't have that sort of rigorous approach to the technical side of things, if I was just thinking about the emotion and how do you communicate the passion and the intensity, the passion, the intensity, a lot of the time is in the music. You don't have to always be emoting it. Sometimes, and that was another thing is playing in an orchestra, even not playing very well. My conducting teacher insisted, and his conducting teacher also insisted, that every conductor had to play in the orchestra. Even if you were bad, you had to sit in the orchestra and you had to play because you learn so much sitting in the orchestra. Admittedly, a lot of it is negative stuff. It's like, ooh, don't ever do that. Ooh, that's terrible. Don't make that face. But you see how things that a conductor does, in most cases completely unconsciously, can almost sabotage the performance. If the conductor is so into it that they're making all these faces, and you're holding a clarinet in your mouth, and it's like, how do you play when someone's looking like that? So yeah, it's there was talk about the emotional side of things. Someone asked, and I don't know if it was John Gielgud or Sir Laurence Olivier, it was one of those great British actors, asked them, if they ever cry during an emotional scene. And the answer that I heard them give was, no, I'm supposed to make the audience cry. If I'm crying, I can't, if I'm overcome with the emotion, I can't be an actor and control the emotion that I'm communicating to the audience. Now, of course, someone who believes in the Stanislavski method would maybe be of a completely different school, but that always struck me a little bit. Sorry, am I still there?
Yeah, you're still here.
I just got a low battery, 20% thing. So sorry I poked you in the eye there.
Good.
But hearing that, it was just, in a television talk show, it stuck with me. And I thought, that's a really interesting thing. Don't let yourself become so overcome with the emotions that you lose the control and the analytical side of things. Because what's really important, the most important thing is the emotion the audience feels. The second most important thing is the emotion that the musicians feel to inspire them to play the music. What you're feeling inside is not as important unless it's helping. And very often, if you're overcome with the emotion of the music, you don't hear anything, you're not controlling anything, you don't really know what's going on, you're just in your own head. So it's like any job. It is not exactly what it looks like to the person looking from the outside. There are complexities and wheels within wheels and everything that everybody does that the average person just doesn't understand. But that's not important. We each have our own thing, and we do it our own way, and hopefully it works.
Thank you so much for this today.
Oh, thank you.
For everybody who's watching, Culture Works is one of the most important organizations in our community, and it supports artists and arts organizations like the Philharmonic throughout the year. This is a difficult time. If there was any time I would encourage you to become a member, now's the time. Go to the website cultureworks.org for all the information about becoming a member. Become a Passport member and enjoy the buy one, get one free tickets throughout the year. Now is the time to be able to support. Neal, thank you so much for this. This is a
Thank
lot of
you.
fun. I think it's great for people to understand who their arts leaders are and who the artists are that are working in the community. I really appreciate this.
And thanks to everybody who's listening and watching and who is helping through Culture Works. You should know that when you once we can again, when you see a performance, when you see an artist's work, you'll know that you helped make that possible, and that maybe without your support, maybe that wouldn't be there. So you in the audience are a really critical part of this thing that we have going. And we need you to help keep it going. And all of us who are in the arts world, we so much appreciate the audience for coming out to see us, for partaking in what we do, for inspiring us, for challenging us, and yes, even for supporting us. So thank you. And I can't wait till we can all be together again.
Yes. Neal, thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
All righty.